the introduction and look forward to discussing some of the things that we've done and continue to do to improve things in the state of Florida. But just on an overall level, we have been ranked in Florida the #1 economy of all 50 states 3 years in a row by CNBC. When I became governor in 2019, Florida was known as one of the country's worst judicial hellholes. And while I think there's a lot of things that have gone into that #1 economy ranking, in addition to just simply dealing with legal reform, I do think that has been an important component in Florida rising amongst the rest of the state's economies. First of all, when I became governor, I had a Supreme Court that had caused huge problems in this state for decades. You could see, you could try to convince the legislature to enact reforms and they would do it, but that wouldn't be final because the Supreme Court would likely rewrite it. And so they were functioning more as a political council of revision than they were as a legal body that its job is to simply apply the law as written and Constitution as written. So any of those things were always up for grabs, and I think that was really bad for the economy and for certainty, particularly for investment. So we came in, and there's a 7-member court. I had 4 of them that had been on the wrong side, and I had 3 that had generally been on the right side. And fortunately for me, 3 of the 4 on the wrong side had reached their age limit, and they were off the court the minute I put my hand on the Bible and swore that oath to be governor. So I had 3 vacancies my first day in office, and we filled them over the course of the next week or two early in the term. But that basically, ended the type of activism that had caused a lot of people a lot of concern about Florida. And we've seen that filter down into lower courts. We've been able to fortify our district courts of appeals through appointment, and even trial judges, although they are elected, the vacancies that arise mean that I get to fill those positions, and a lot of times they're able to stay. So Florida's judicial system, in terms of what you get when you go in, is dramatically improved from where it was at the end of 2018. And that's something that's really, really important. I think that's been in a lot of different issues. I don't think it's just the business issues, but I think you can have pretty strong certainty now in Florida. If there's a reform that's passed and signed into law, unless it really is legally defective, that is going to be something that's going to stick. And that wasn't true prior to us doing that. Now, we've dealt with a lot of different issues, but the legal reform in terms of the tort reform, very difficult thing to get done. A lot of people always say you need to do it, but there are a lot of vested interests that don't want you to be able to do it. If you doubt me, just get in your car and drive on the interstate here in Central Florida. I don't think you can go more than 100 feet without seeing a billboard from a plaintiff's lawyer. It's just what it is. And so as the legal profession has transformed from more of a vocation or profession into a business, obviously they're going to see how they can make money off these cases. And so Florida had been one of the worst states in terms of the trial litigation. And look, I'm all about it. I mean, like if somebody is harmed, they should have a right to go in and get a redress of the grievances, including monetary compensation. But I think what we were saying was, someone would have a $50,000 claim, and they'd end up with a judgment where the lawyer got $300,000, and then the person with the claim got $50,000. How is that a system that makes any sense? And obviously, people end up having to pay for that. So we knew there were problems, not just in homeowners insurance market, which was obviously experiencing a lot of problems, but also in things like auto insurance. And there's different models about how you approach it. Some people try to do big government. I know California has tried that. And what happens is these companies leave. If the companies aren't there offering policy, as I don't know how you could possibly make a market work. And so one of the things that we want to do, okay, what are the defects in the market? What have other states done that are better than Florida? What are we doing that may be out of step that's causing problems? But the immediate goal was to shore up the market and then get more companies to be willing to deploy capital here. And that is how you ultimately benefit the consumer. I mean, the reason why a Big Mac doesn't cost $50, because if McDonald's could charge $50 for a Big Mac, they would. The reason why it doesn't is because you have all these other burger joints you would go that would undercut it. So if you have companies in the market competing for businesses, people's business, that's the way that you're able to drive more affordability. And so we looked at what needed to be done. And on property, we had a period in between 2004 and 2005 where there were a lot of hurricanes that hit Florida. That obviously caused some turmoil in the insurance market. One of the governors at the time, who actually has run for governor since then a bunch of times, he tried to do like price controls. He tried to do things. Basically, he was like good riddance when companies leave and all this other stuff. And so that didn't work, but it did drive companies out. And so then what happened was we had 10 years with no storms. You had a lot of these smaller companies that were coming in. I don't know how well capitalized they were, but when there's no storms, it's like, okay, you're able to handle that. Then you got into 2017 and kind of that spell of good luck. I mean, we had some smaller, a skirt in 2016 of the East Coast with Matthew, and then we had Hermine, which was relatively modest by Florida standards for sure in 2016. So we did have those two, but really the first major to make landfall on Florida in over a decade was Irma in 2017, and the way that it did a lot of damage kind of just throughout the state. And then Hurricane Michael in 2018. So I became governor in 2019, and it was interesting because, there were definitely signs of stress, but there was also people saying, oh, no, the market's going to be able to hold all this stuff. Well, you had 3 years under Florida law at the time, to bring claims and all this other stuff. So Irma happening in 2017, by the time you get to 2019, that was not closed. I mean, there were still things. People were filing new claims and all this other stuff. There were lawsuits that were being generated. And so you saw particularly some of these smaller companies, they weren't making it. A lot of those companies were having a lot of trouble. And then overall, as that was happening, you started to see the inflation that was wrought by the COVID policies, both the disruption of the supply chain because of government action, as well as the inflation of the currency, the Fed, the spending, the debt, all that stuff. So however much it cost to repair a home in 2018, 4 or 5 years later, that cost had gone up 50%, 70%, sometimes 100%. So that obviously made things very difficult. And then, of course, in Florida, just as we had 10 years where we didn't have any storms, we then had not just Michael and Irma, but we had Hurricane Ian, Idalia, and we had 2 majors last year. And then we had some other smaller hurricanes like Debbie last year. We had Sally in 2020. So this is rising prices overall, a very active storm season. Now, we haven't had a storm make landfall in the whole continental United States. I knock on wood on that because people say, oh, well, it's been quiet. The minute people start saying it's quiet, that's when I remember they were saying that before Irma hit, because we were like mid-September 22, and they were like, there's been nothing. Because, every year they say it's going to be the worst hurricane season ever. Like every year I've been governor, they've said it's going to be worse. We've never seen anything like it. And so nothing had happened. And people were like, see, they were wrong and all this other stuff. And the problem is the hurricane season continues to go through the rest of September and through October. So you did. But nevertheless, we are here now, early October. There doesn't seem to be anything on the immediate horizon. The things that are developing seem like they're probably not going to impact the continental United States. But who knows, right? Hopefully we get a run where we don't have a lot of impacts like we did 15 years ago. But that's just kind of what we had to do. So we obviously can't control whether we're going to get hit by a hurricane or not. Some people think we can, but I mean, I know we can't, because if we did, I would keep them away. So you have that. You also have the overall inflation that was happening, which is state government. I mean, our budget's $116, $17 billion. I mean, that's budget dust in Washington for what they were borrowing and spending and what the Fed does with its balance sheet. So our impact on inflation either way is just simply negligible. So those were, but the one thing that we could affect in a meaningful way with respect to our insurance market was to address the anomaly that while Florida had 8% of all property insurance claims nationwide, it accounted for 78% of all litigation nationwide. And so you cannot have a market that is that costly in terms of legal expenses and not have that impact what individuals are having to pay for those policies. And so we really felt that addressing that anomaly would, one, provide some stability to the market, that it would induce more businesses to want to come and offer people coverage, but then also, of course, if you were able to not have such a stiff amount of legal suits and costs, that ultimately you would be able to see relief for the homeowners who desperately needed it as those rates had gone up. And so we did do the most significant reforms that I think any state has done over this period of time. But we did that kind of at the tail end of 22. We were trying to do this earlier than that. It was hard with the legislature. I had some that wanted to do it. I had others that didn't want to do it. And then I think what happened was when I got reelected, we had such a massive wave. You had a state that had been a 1-point state the entire last decade, and then I won by less than 1 point. Now we win by 1.5 million votes. We win by, 20 points. Like they literally called the race the second the polls closed in the Panhandle, which for Florida was not normal, had supermajorities in the legislature. So we had a lot of momentum. And I was just like, listen, we've got to get this stuff done. This is not an easy issue. Any politician that says there's simple solutions is not being honest. So let's do. So we were able to do that in a special session, the first one, and then we did in the regular session in 23 these reforms. But I told people at the time, like, this is not going to just happen overnight. And had we had done it earlier, which is what I wanted to do, had the legislature done it, then maybe those changes would have seeped in. I will say this in 23, the reinsurance increases would have been much more severe had we not done that at the end of 2022. I mean, it did have an impact, but it didn't totally filter through. So 23 happens, and then we get into 24. And 2024 calendar year, Florida's market had the lowest increases of all 50 states. No one would have thought that that was something in the offing just a couple years earlier. 2025, we've seen something very, very similar. In fact, as of September 30th, Florida's Office of Insurance Regulation has received 59 rate filings for rate decreases and 87 filings for 0 rate increases. And then one of the largest insurers in the state, Florida Peninsula Insurance Company, has requested its largest rate decrease in recent memory. That would not have happened had we not done those reforms. And as was mentioned before, we have 17 new companies, that are entering the market. That's how earn people's business. If you have somebody that does a good job, then as a customer, you have. I mean, I always tell the story. One of the storms. This is before I was governor. It may have been Irma. Maybe it was Irma. My wife's car got doused, and it was inoperable, basically. There was a surge. We were living on the coast in Northeast Florida, and so it's done. So I call USAA. They have a guy come out like the next day, looks at it, and then 2 days later, they send me a check, or they deposit it into the thing. And so when that happens, it's like, yeah, like that's a company that I want to continue, to do business with. If they tried to deny it and then this or never responded or that, well, then I would look elsewhere. So consumers have an ability to do it, and that helps discipline the behavior of the businesses that are in that market. If they know that there are 2 or 3 other options, and hopefully more, that they would be able to have. So, and then if you look overall, through the summer, the 30-day average request for homeowners rates was down 1.4%. And even last year, where we had the lowest increase in the country of all 50 states, it was still up a few percent at that same point last year in 2024. And then, of course, before that, in 23, you had it was up 8% for the rate requests. Even though we had done the reforms, that had not necessarily filtered through. Year to date, 214,000 policies have entered the private market. That's reduced the taxpayer-backed citizens insurance by $303 billion. A lot of people don't realize the way Citizens is constructed. If there was a major event and it had excessive liabilities from what it could pay out, it is authorized under law to institute assessments on every policy in the state, regardless of whether it's Citizens. So you could literally have a situation where somebody is renting an apartment, has an automobile, and has auto insurance, and they could get hit on both of those policies with Citizens assessments for this. So obviously that is not acceptable to be able to do, and the way you do it is to make sure that you have a vibrant private market. Interestingly, though, Citizens insurance, the number of lawsuits has fallen by nearly 50% since the reforms were enacted in 2022. So you actually saw this year they were able to deliver rate reductions to a lot of the Citizens policyholders in places like Miami-Dade County and Broward County, which has always been considered a very difficult market, and that's really as a result of the litigation reform. But it wasn't just homeowners policies. If you look now with auto insurance policies, and I know many of companies that are involved in the homeowners market are also involved in auto, though not all. The top 5 insurance auto insurance groups have had an average 6.5 reduction in rates in Florida in 2025. Now, as of the end of 2024, auto insurance had been arguably the most inflationary item of any of the basket of things people look at for how households are being affected by inflation. I think it had been up like 20%, and that was going all over the country. So there's not a lot of places in this country where you're seeing declines in rates for auto insurance, but you are doing that in the state of Florida. And look, it's kind of like they said it was, I think it was Rumsfeld was, people say, well, don't you need more of this for war? He's like, you go to, I think he said, you go to war with the army that you have or with the military that you have. Well, we have the drivers that we have in the state of Florida. That is not susceptible to a very quick or any type of political solution. It just is what it is. Now, we obviously are helping Trump with the illegal immigration, and we've made headway there. There's obviously problems with that class of drivers, but there's also problems with other drivers in Florida. That's just the nature of it. And so it's always been a tricky market, and yet we are seeing that reduce. In those top 5 insurers, they count for 78% of Florida's auto insurance market. So that's like most automobile policies in the state of Florida, are seeing a reduction in their insurance rates, which is something that's really, really significant. We also have a big reduction in the personal auto liability loss ratio. It's the lowest in the nation now at 53.3% as of the end of 2024. And again, that's all because of the reforms that were done. So you would think like those numbers are meaningful, There's some people that claim, oh, I could just come, elect me, I'll just, you won't have to pay anything for any of this. I mean, we know like that is obviously nonsense. But like, what are credible reforms that you would have done differently or that you would propose now? And I'm all ears because, I would love to see anytime good policy hits my desk, I want to embrace it if it's going to be something that's going to benefit the state of Florida. Unfortunately, in the Florida House of Representatives this year, even though I laid out everything and even though we had most of this data by the spring in terms of what had happened anyways and had provided that, they basically tried to roll back the reforms that had been done. That's the only reason why you see what's happened in auto or property markets. And their own analysis in the Florida House of Representatives that the staff does predicted that the effect of that would cause insurance rates to spike, some by as much as 50%. So why are you doing that if this is something that would lead to those results, which would obviously not be good for your constituents? And the reason is that effort was not being driven by what was best for the constituents. It was being driven by special interest lobbying, in this case by the trial lawyers. They wanted to be able to reverse that because it has made it more difficult for lawyers to get rich. That is true. Those reforms have done that. And so they were really doing the bidding of the trial bar. And I said very early on, I was like, that is not going to happen. We're not going to let that fly in the state of Florida. And, to the credit of the Senate in Florida, they also said, no dice, not going to happen. And so none of this stuff ultimately really advanced anywhere. I don't think the Senate considered any of the stuff with respect to the 22 or 23 reform rollback at all. There were probably other things that the House wanted to do they couldn't even get. I know the one bill that they got through, they muscled through, really divided the Republicans in the legislature. I mean, think about it. People have been asking you about, there's a handful of issues that voters typically ask about. And if they're asking you, hey, what did you do on this or that, and you tell them, hey, we just did a bunch of reforms, we're trying to shore up the market, we're trying to get, bring more businesses here so that they'll offer better policies, all this stuff, and then you turn around like the next year and you try to revert, how do you square that with your constituents? So I think it caused a lot of angst in that Republican conference, and it really should have. And here's what I always tell people, because the media will be like, well, governor wants to do this, is the legislature going to follow? And they want to try to say, oh, the legislature, if I propose something the legislature does, oh, they just follow the governor, they don't do anything. And if they don't want to do it, oh, they don't listen to the governor. That's kind of the narrative they want. But it ain't about listening to me. It's about doing what you told the voters that you would do. Now, I'm going to be very consistent on advocating for things that we campaigned on and that we've stood for over these years, and so you can take that to the bank. But none of these guys ran on doing what they tried to do in this legislative session. And so you don't got to agree with me, but if you're going to try to, you attain office based on the success of other people, and then you turn around and try to undo some of the things that have been done, you owe it to the voters to articulate that that's your plan of action. And if you haven't gotten the buy-in from the voters, this stuff just doesn't work. And I think that's part of the reason why it ran aground. They didn't have a mandate to try to undo the reforms that they were trying to undo. So we were able to hold the line on that, and I don't think that there's really any realistic chance that any of this stuff will come rolling back in next year's legislative session. And then the question's going to be, okay, you've seen what's happened. You've seen, and we've done other stuff too. I mean, with respect to homeowners insurance, we did the My Safe Florida Home program. So we've put money in there. People get grants. They make improvements to their home. They're able to qualify for more attractive insurance premiums. And then obviously, in the event of a storm, hopefully mitigate damage as a result of doing that home hardening. And that was immensely popular that it actually ran out of money, and you had people on the waiting list. This was in 24. Obviously, we had Idalia, and people were still really recovering from Ian in 22, to be honest with you. So at the beginning of this year, I said, let's replenish my Safe Florida home and clear the waiting list. You've already approved these people for these home projects. So why wouldn't you just do it? And, the House leadership didn't want to do that. We finally got my Safe Florida home funding in June when they actually did the budget. But, my view is you have some of these folks that are on the waiting list. They just got hit by Helene, or they just got hit with Milton. If we're going to do it anyways, do it now so they can make the improvements. And so next hurricane season, they're in better shape. Fortunately, they haven't been hit yet, and hopefully they don't this hurricane season. But I'm just thinking to myself, this is something that, you offered to people. It isn't like they're just asking out of the ether here. They're on a waiting list approved, and you didn't fund. So we got some of that funding. We're probably going to have to do more, but we also did other things for transparency to make sure. What I've seen is you have some reputable companies, but over the years, you'll have some that may not just do the right thing. And we just want transparency. We want to make sure that if somebody has a policy and they have something that triggers that claim, that can be done in a very efficient and transparent process. If somebody has a policy that doesn't cover something's happened, you shouldn't have an O.J. Simpson trial over that, right? That's very costly for everybody. But on the flip side, we want to have quick adjudication and resolution of the valid claims that our taxpayers and our homeowners have. So all in, we've been able to accomplish a lot. I want to continue to see more businesses come into Florida in these markets, because I think that we've shown, well, first of all, we've shown we're serious about both the judiciary and the statutory legal reforms, which are very, very significant. But if you also look, coming on the heels of some of these hurricanes, what you've seen is, this newer construction in Florida does very, very well. I would go in Hurricane Michael. I remember when I first became governor, you would go new construction. You wouldn't have known a hurricane even came through. And then next to it, obliteration, like an older structure. And I saw the same thing in Hurricane Ian, some of these newer things. You'd have an area that would be in a marina, and they'd have the building there where the boats would go. And it was new, and it was you wouldn't know. And then you'd have other marinas where you have something and that had a lot of problems. So what you're seeing is the building of these things, is really up to snuff, and I think it's really performed very, very well. So in that sense, we have more risks from tropical weather, but there's no state that's more resilient in the face of that. Certainly with our construction, second to none. And then the response that we've done, and it's not just the government responding. Obviously we have to lead all this, but if you look at the power restoration after Hurricane Milton, we had 4.2 million restored in 72 hours. That was a record because these guys are coming in from other states. They're pre-staged. As soon as the storm passes, they're in connecting things. If you look at how they've responded after Ian or after Helene or these things, it's not easy. There's a lot of stuff, that needs to happen. But compare that to, say, a Hurricane Andrew and what that happened with Homestead. I'd argue Homestead has never really, fully recovered from that. But certainly you go to Homestead, 10 years after that happened, and it was very, very clear, you have that. In Florida, we had the bridge in Sanibel, the causeway. It was disconnected in 3 places. They came to me a week after the storm and said, can you help with it? It wasn't a state bridge. I think it was a local county bridge. And we're like, yeah, we'll do it. So 2 weeks later, we reopened the Sanibel Causeway. They thought it was going to take 6 months. Pine Island Bridge, same thing. They thought it was going to take 6 months. We did that in 3 days, and people were back on the island. They're able to do things to recover. So that matters, and that's why I think we have the best bounce back of any state with respect to all of this. So I will just end by saying we're here now at the beginning of October. We're always prepared and monitoring for whatever the tropical season may do. But, when you've had 6 major hurricanes in 7 years, you do deserve a little break every now and again. So my one hope is that we get a break from any major hurricanes this year. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Enjoy the conference, and God bless.